Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, I want to talk about what I would personally consider to be the most effective way to internalize all of the notes on the fretboard. When I say internalize, that's not the same as memorizing. A lot of these apps and a lot of these little games and stuff like that display a fretboard on the screen and then have a note pop up and then you'll have to guess that note in the shortest amount of time possible. That is training you to memorize the notes on the fretboard. Now, I'm not saying that that's impossible to do. I'm not saying that you're not eventually going to memorize all the notes on the fretboard. It's just that it's far, far more effective if you internalize the notes instead. What I mean by that is if you ask a guitar player that's been playing for 5 years or so, you say, hey, what's that note right there? 5th fret of the low E string. They're going to know that's an A. The reason being is because they've probably played an A major bar chord a million times. They've probably played the A minor pentatonic scale in position 1 a million times. They have just used that location of the fretboard so many times within the 5 years that they've been playing that they have internalized that that is the note A. If you ask that same guitar player, you say, hey, what's that note right there? 10th fret of the B string. They may be able to reference their way back to it. They may be able to say, okay, well, if that's an A, move up 2 frets, skip a string, that's an A. Move up 3 frets, skip a string, oh, okay, that's an A. They may be able to think about it. It may take them a second or two, but they had to reference back to what they have already internalized. So if it takes even a single second that you have to think about it, if you can't just instantly look at that location of the fretboard and say, yep, that's an A, then you haven't internalized it yet. Another problem with taking a memorization approach to learning the fretboard is the whole sharps and flats problem. So let's say that you have trained your brain to think in terms of sharps. Let's say that you're playing your little app game and the 11th fret of the B string pops up and you're like, oh, that's the note A sharp, no problem, got it, I've internalized that one. Well, let's say that, you're playing with a band or something like that, or just whatever hypothetical situation comes up and they're like, hey, do you know where a B flat is on the B string? And you have to think about that. That note right there is still a B flat. But you've learned it as an A sharp. You've internalized it as an A sharp, but you haven't internalized it as a B flat. So you've memorized the whole fretboard in terms of sharps, but not flats. Now you got to do that, So if you actually do what I want to talk about in this video, if you actually put your mind to this and you sit down and you work through this and you stick with it for a few months even. It doesn't have to be a long time, 15 minutes a day, a few months. If you actually do this, you're going to learn 4 things. You're going to internalize 4 things. Number 1, you're going to learn how chords fit together within a key. The second thing that you're going to learn is that all 12 keys work exactly the same way as each other. On the guitar fretboard, the shapes are exactly the same regardless of whether you're in the key of C major or if you're in the key of D minor or the key of B flat major or whatever. It does not matter. The third thing that you're going to internalize is how to play any major chord or any minor chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. You want to play an A minor chord in this location of the fretboard? No problem. You want to play a B flat major chord in this location of the fretboard? No problem. This method will allow you to play any major chord or any minor chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. And then the fourth thing is that you're going to learn and internalize all of the notes on your fretboard. Now, if that is your primary goal, if your main objective of doing this is to learn all the notes of your fretboard, that's great. This is a great way to do it. But it's just that you're going to learn all this other stuff as well. When I was doing this, I was trying to learn the cage system. I was trying to teach myself to internalize the cage system so I could spot the cage shapes anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar, regardless of what key I'm in. And then as a byproduct, I was like, oh, I also learned all the notes on my fretboard. That's cool. Not only did I learn them and memorize them, but I internalized them, So it's a pretty nice byproduct of this system. All right, so now that I've pointed out all the benefits of learning this system, let me just give you a bird's eye view of how this works. So the whole thing we're going to be doing here is we're going to be playing one chord progression, but we're going to be playing it for all 12 keys, and we're going to be playing it all the way across the entire neck of the guitar. So we're going to pick the first key. We're going to play a chord progression here, 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 here. We're then going to switch to the second of 12 keys. We're going to play the same chord progression we just played, but in the new key. We're going to play it here. We're going to play it here. We're going to play it here, 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 here. We're then going to go to the third of 12 keys, and we're going to play the exact same chord progression here, 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 and so on. 12 times. Right? 12 keys, 12 times. If you prefer to think in terms of 24 keys, that's fine too. You just have to do it 24 times instead. It's up to you. So the chord progression that we're going to use is going to be the super generic pop 1-5-6-4 chord progression. Everyone has heard the 1-5-6-4 chord progression. It's so ridiculously common that there's memes about it. There's bands that make up songs. Axis of Awesome, if you check out the Axis of Awesome song where they make fun of the 1-5-6-4 chord progression. Let me just play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in the key of C major, which has the relative minor of A minor. You can call it the key of C major, you can call it the key of A minor, call it whatever you want, but it sounds like this. Let me play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in the key of G major, which has the relative minor of E minor. So you can call this the key of G major, or you can call this the key of E minor, whatever you want. It'll sound like this. Let me try playing a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in the key of D major, which has the relative minor of B minor. That's going to sound like this. Now I can keep going. I just did it in 3 keys, but by all means you can play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in any of the 12 keys. But we're just playing right here. So the way that this immersion method works is I would say, okay, let me start with the first one that I did. That was the key of C major / A minor, whichever key you prefer to call it. And I'm going to play my 1-5-6-4 progression. I'm going to play it here. And then I'm going to play the 1-5-6-4 progression in the key of C major, A minor here. And then I'm going to play a 1-5-6-4 progression in the key of C major, A minor here. And then I'm going to play it here. And I'm just going to keep doing it until I run out of the fretboard. After I've done that, then I'm done with that key for the day. I would then move on and do the same thing for the key of G major, E minor. That's the second of the 12 keys. All right, so you probably already picked up on this, but in case you haven't, you can use your circle of fifths as your cheat sheet the entire time. So the major and minor chords that are found in any of the 12 keys, they're all grouped together in a grouping of 6 on the circle of fifths. So for the first key, C major, which has the relative minor of A minor, if you want to know what your 3 major chords and 3 minor chords are for that particular key, they're all grouped together like so in this grouping of 6. If you want to play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in this key, your 1 chord's always going to be found outer circle center position, your 5 chord's outer circle clockwise, your 6 chord is inner circle center, your 4 chord is outer circle counterclockwise. So then when you want to go and move on to the next key and you want to play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in that key, you just move the grouping of 6 a little bit, G major, E minor, right in the center. That's your new key that you're in. 1 chord is outer circle center, 5 chord is outer circle clockwise, 6 chord is inner circle center, 4 chord is outer circle counterclockwise. If you then want to move on to the next key, you just move your grouping of 6 a little bit more. Now this is the key of D major, B minor. 1 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 4 chord. So you can just keep moving around the circle of fifths, and your 1-5-6-4 are always going to have the same positioning within the grouping of 6. So the next thing that you're going to want to know how to do is to actually play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and here, and so on. To do that, you're going to need to know shapes. These shapes are movable. These shapes apply to every single key. So the first of the 4 major chord shapes is going to be this one right here. So this is just the high 4 strings of a basic 6-string bar chord that is rooted on the low E string. So if you know that this is an A major bar chord and you just play just the high 4 strings of it, this is also an A major chord. The second of the 4 major bar chord shapes is going to look like this. This is just 4 strings right here. Now, this is coming from the C shape. If you can recognize that this is coming from the C shape, you'll say, oh, well, that's an F major chord. The root, the lowest note right here is 8th fret of the A string. All right, so that's an F major chord in the C shape. So we're just going to be focusing on the high 4 strings of it for now. The third of the 4 major bar chord shapes is going to look like this. This is just the high 3 strings that we're playing here. This is coming from this shape right here. This is known as the A shape in the cage system. This is also just known as a basic major bar chord rooted on the A string. Since I'm playing it right here, with the root being on the 5th fret of the A string, this would be a D major chord. So if I just take the high 3 strings of that, it's still a D major chord. Now you know where this is coming from. So this is just a piece of that full bar chord shape. And then the fourth of the 4 major bar chord shapes is going to look like this right here. So this is coming from the G shape in the cage system. So if you were to play the full G shape, it would look like this. This is actually a C major chord in the G shape because your lowest note, your root note, is right there, 8th fret of the low E string. So we're not playing that in full. We're just going to be playing just the high 4 strings of it. This is still a C major chord. It's still a C major chord in the G shape, but it's just the high 4 strings. So that's the 4 major chord shapes. The 3 minor chord shapes that we're going to be using, here's the first one. It's going to look like this. So this is just coming from this shape right here. You've probably seen this before. This is just a basic minor bar chord rooted on the A string. In its full 5-string form, it looks like this, but if you just take the high 3 strings, it looks like this. So you probably recognize this as a D minor. And this is still a D minor. We're just taking the high 3 strings of the D minor chord. So this is going to be the minor chord shape number 1. The second minor chord shape is going to look like this. This spans across 4 strings. This is coming from this shape right here. This is a basic minor bar chord rooted on the low E string. This spans all 6 strings. So if you can recognize, this is an A minor bar chord right here. This is still an A minor chord right here. We're just playing just the high 4 strings of it. And then the third of the 3 minor chord shapes that we're going to be using is this one right here. Really what it's coming from is it's coming from the C shape, made minor, and then we're just using the high 3 strings of it. So I don't want to confuse you too much. Just memorize the way that this looks. If you are familiar with a D minor chord, you've probably seen that shape played down here before because that's exactly what it is. It's just moved up to wherever you want to move it, because every single shape on the entire guitar is movable. It doesn't matter what key you're playing in. It doesn't matter which chord root you're playing. If you want to play a D minor chord, if you want to play a D sharp minor chord, if you want to play an E minor chord, if you want to play an F minor chord, F sharp minor chord, G minor chord, the shape remains the same. The location on the fretboard changes. That's how the guitar works. All right, so you now have your 7 shapes. And just keep in mind that this immersion method approach is primarily about learning the high 4 strings. Usually guitar players internalize the notes on the low E and A string pretty quickly. That's because we play all of our bar chords rooted on the low E string or on the A string. We start most of our scale patterns that we learn in the beginning starting on like the low E string and sometimes starting on the A string. It's usually the high 4 strings that we don't give the necessary attention to, and that's why we haven't internalized those notes yet, and that's why this immersion method is entirely about focusing on the high 4 strings. If you check out that other lesson that I mentioned earlier, the Learn the Fretboard in 12 Weeks, the more beginner-friendly approach, that covers all 6 strings, so I just wanted to point that out. With that information, the way that you're going to inadvertently learn all of the notes and internalize all of the notes on the fretboard is by knowing where the root note location is within each of the shapes. For example, let's say that you're on the first of the 12 keys. You're in the key of C major or the key of A minor. You're playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression in the key of C major, A minor. You play your 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression here. You then move up the neck a little bit and you play it here. You then move up a little bit, you play it here, you play it here. So let's say that you're like right here and you're on the C major chord, right? And you're using this shape right here. So you're already thinking, okay, I'm in the key of C major. I'm playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. The one chord in this key that I'm working in right now is a C major chord. Root note of a C major chord is C. I know my root note locations for this particular shape. There's a C there, there's a C there. You see what I'm saying? And then you move on to the next chord, which would be the 5 chord for this key that you're playing in. The 5 chord for the key that you're playing right now would be the G major chord. So that would be this shape right here. And then you know, okay, well, I'm on a G major chord right now. I know root note location for this particular shape, which is one of the 4 major chord shapes that I showed you. I know the root note location resides on the B string. So I know that that's a G right there. You then move on to the next chord, which is the 6 chord. And then that would be an A minor for the key that we're working in right now. And okay, you just jump up to there, you play that shape. That's one of the 3 minor chord shapes that you're going to be using here. You're like, okay, I know that's an A minor chord because it's a 6 chord. I know where the root note location is because I didn't only memorize these shapes as shapes, I also memorized them where the root note location is. All right, so I'm here. This is an A minor chord, and I know my root note location resides right on the B string, so I know that that's the note A. You then move on to the 4 chord because that's the progression that we're practicing. It's a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression. The 4 chord in that key is an F major chord. Okay, so I play the F major chord right here, but not only is this an F major chord, not only do I know this shape, but I've also learned that the root note location for this shape, which is one of the 4 major chord shapes that we're going to be using for this whole exercise, the root note location always resides on the G string. So I know that that's the note F. All right, so I've given you everything that you need to apply this immersion method. You have your 7 shapes. You know where the root note location resides within each of those 7 shapes. Now I'm going to give you actual examples. I'm going to do one example all the way up the entire fretboard for the key of C major / A minor. I'm then going to give you another example all the way up the entire fretboard for the key of G major / E minor. So let's see how this works. All right, so usually when I start this exercise out, I start out down here in the open position using cowboy chords. So when I use the cowboy chords, I typically don't play the reduced versions, like just the 4 string or the 3 string versions. You can if you want to though. So like the first chord, your 1 chord, the C major chord, if you want to just play the high 4 strings of it, that's fine. You're still applying one of the 7 shapes. And then when you play the G major chord, you can play it, since we're down here in open position and we have open strings included as well, you can just play the full chord like this, or you could just play the high 4 strings like this, and still G major chord is one of the 4 shapes that we used. And then when it moves to the next chord, which for this particular key would be the A minor chord, you can play the full chord like this, or you can just play the high 3 strings if you want. That's perfectly fine. That's one of the 3 minor chord shapes that we used. And then for the F major chord, play it in full if you want, or just play the high 4 strings. All right, so that's just the open position chords. Now when I slide up a little bit, we're not in the open position anymore. I can't use the open strings. So now I'm going to be actually using one of the 7 shapes for each of the chords. So starting out, we have our 1 chord, which is a C major chord. You then go to a G major chord. That can be found in this shape right here. The A minor chord, you can either jump down here or you can come up here. There's other configurations of the notes that make up an A minor chord, but for the purpose of this exercise and just sticking to the 7 shapes that we're going to be using, you don't really have one available right here. So this is going to be the nearest minor chord shape for that one. And then coming from there, the F major chord, you can find that right like that. There's your 4 chord right here, F major. So all right, and then you can start back over on the C. You can come back down to the C that you started on, or you can just continue moving up. And then you can come to the C here, G here. You can come to this A minor. And then you can play an F major like this. And then a C here. And then a G here. And then you can play an A minor here. F here. So there's not one exact right way to do this because as you can see, like what I was right here, I had the option to either jump to here to play an A minor chord or jump to here to play an A minor chord. So your way of running up the entire fretboard and playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression in one single key may be slightly different than my way, which is going to be slightly different than the next person's way. So there's not just one way to do this. Going through this process one single time, if it's your first time, it might take you a week. You know, it might take you a week to work this whole thing out. But then when you get to the next key, it's going to take you less time. And then when you get to the next key after that, it's going to take you less time. You just keep doing this. You keep doing this. And you saw how quickly I was able to identify a C major, a G major, an A minor, and an F major in all these different locations. That's because I've ran through this process many, many times. I spent like a year doing this. All right, so I'm just going to give you one more example now where I move up the entire fretboard playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression, but now I'm going to do it in the second of 12 keys. Now I'm going to do it in the key of G major, which has the relative minor of E minor. So the 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression for this new key is going to be like this, using just open cowboy chords. All right, so I want to jump up a little bit. So a G major can be found here. A D major can be found here. An E minor can be found here. C major can be found here. And then, of course, taking that chord progression a step further, that also lets me know, okay, this is a G here, and this is a G here, and then this is an D here, and then this is an E here, and then this is a C here, because I've internalized the root note locations within each of the 7 shapes that we're using for this immersion method process. So I know where my root notes are on the upper strings, which is usually the problem areas for a lot of guitar players. And then additionally, on top of that, you've also now used this shape right here twice. Right now, this C major chord was just used as the 4 chord in the current key that we're playing in. We're playing a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression in the key of G major. Your 4 chord in the key of G major is a C major chord, and we just used this shape for our C major chord. In the previous example, the C major chord was also used. It was a different key, so the C major chord was functioning as the 1 chord in the previous example. But that doesn't change the fact that we still used the same chord shape twice now. So this is all leading to you internalizing the fact that when you see this right here in this location of the fretboard, you can start to say, that's a C major chord. I've seen that. I've used it in several different keys. I've internalized that now. All right, so moving up a little bit, here's a G right here. Here's a D major chord right here. And then an E minor chord right here. And you can do a C major chord like this. All right, continue to move up, you could play this G right here. Then you could play a D major like this. You can play an E minor like this. You can play a C like this. Keep moving up, you can play a G like this. D like this. E minor like this. And then a C like this. And then I had to stop because I ran out of frets in that direction, but that was, again, a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression, but just played in a new key now. We're now in the key of G major or the key of E minor. So not only am I inadvertently learning the notes of the fretboard and internalizing all the notes of the fretboard, I'm using these same shapes over and over and over and over again. And I'm internalizing how a 1 chord moves to a 5 chord, and then how a 5 chord moves to a 6 chord, and how a 6 chord moves to a 4 chord. It's the same exact shape. That's why I'm like, oh, I'm in this key now. Oh, this is my 6 chord. Oh, there's the 4 chord. Cool, got it. And that is the immersion method in a nutshell. All right, so if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, whatever, feel free to ask. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.